Welcome to the Public Technology Institute's Professional Development Series, a free monthly webinar series designed to connect local government IT professionals with the people, conversations, and ideas that matter most. PTI is the only national organization dedicated exclusively to supporting local government technology through consulting, education, and a peer-connected community. We help you lead smarter, grow faster, and stay ahead of what's next. In this month's episode, The Next in Line, we will cover a critical but underrated topic that affects every organization: succession planning. Here to kick off the webinar is PTI's Director of Education, Darryl Polk.
Welcome to the Public Technology Institute Professional Development Series. My name is Darryl Polk. I'm the Director of Education for Public Technology Institute. And today I'm going to be walking you through the subject of succession planning. And we're going to take a little different approach on this than maybe you've encountered. So I want to talk about succession planning as a system and not just a single objective to replace you or replace an executive when they leave an organization. So the framework that I'm going to use for this is one that I found with Harvard Business Review that has really stuck with me and reflects kind of the strategy that I've adopted over my career. And to kind of give you a little background on why I'm presenting on this and why I'm comfortable presenting on this, I have a public sector career of almost 40 years. I held executive roles in all three organizations that I worked with, and I successfully implemented succession plans for my position as well as other positions in every one of the organizations. So every time I left an organization, somebody who I prepared and mentored for the role succeeded me as I left. And I saw the advantages of that, staying in touch with them after I left. If you look at this slide, it shows, and I was unable to find information on public sector, but private sector from 2021, there were over $1 trillion in estimated losses from S&P 1500 companies from not having effective succession plans in place. Succession without a plan is disruptive, and that disruption has a cost. And I think for public sector agencies, it's not measured in dollars and cents, it's measured in trust and outcomes. When you have to adopt a hard turn because nobody prepared a succession plan for your departure or for someone else's departure, it means everybody has to take time and energy and effort away from your day-to-day objectives or the things that you have on your plate to now deal with this change management from an unanticipated or unplanned change in the organization. So we're going to talk through not succession planning as an objective, but succession planning as a system, as a cultural artifact of the organization, something that you weave into the fabric and make sure that everybody understands how this works and how they participate in it. The basic framework on this is a three-step process, and you'll identify this from other projects that you've had in public sector IT, and it's build, perform, exit. When we implement new systems, like a new ERP or a network refresh or hardware refreshes, there are three phases to it. It's where we're building the project, doing our planning, procurement, all of these pre-stage things. There's performing, where we're actually getting the project going, and then exiting and handing off. And that's where what we do is make sure people are trained, make sure people are comfortable, make sure that now that it's in place, people are using it to its fullest. So let's talk about that in terms of succession planning, and not just for executive roles, not just for leadership roles, but for every role in the organization. So on the build part, you can't appoint what you didn't build. And the reason I wanted to put this in here is if you treat succession planning as something that you will handle when the time comes, you won't have the luxury of building in all of the things that you need to be investing to make sure it's successful. So the time to start succession planning is always now. It's always now. It's the minute you promote somebody, it's the minute you're hired or promoted. Succession planning should be part of the DNA of your strategy and the organization's strategy. And the way that you do that is you start communicating that immediately and as frequently as you can. You want to start building your bench. And we'll talk about like how that looks, because it's not just about leadership. We're going to talk about how everybody in your organization should have a succession plan, even if it's to stay in the same role for an extended period of time. IT people can be reclusive folk, and sometimes they don't want to promote out of a role. And we'll talk about kind of that mindset that you have to overcome of I'm going to entrench myself and I'm going to master my position and I don't want to go anywhere and I just want people to leave me alone until I decide to leave. A succession planning mindset gets people to understand that there's always going to be change and that they need to prepare for that and they need to adapt and they need to develop their own plan to make sure that they stay relevant and engaged and ultimately satisfied with their role, whatever it turns out to be in the organization. Understanding these leadership roles can take about 3 years to get a successful succession plan in place where you feel comfortable that you have a cadre of people, not one person, but as many people as you can find to be eligible for that next role. You don't want to bank on a single person when it comes to these. On the perform part, this is an unfortunate aspect of government work. And I know that many of us in public settings and when we're pontificating with other people, especially our peers, we talk about the evaluation process as a living thing and we have small conversations, we meet with people all the time. But the truth for many of us is it becomes a yearly ritual and more of an obligation than an opportunity. And we've all encountered that situation where someone's evaluation comes up and maybe it's late, maybe now it's 3 months or even 6 months or even a year that since they've had their last evaluation, you're overdue with it. And you're struggling on how to retroactively tell them all the things you should have been telling them over that time in a way that doesn't threaten them and in a way that lets them build off that as opposed to being something punitive and judgmental in the past. Evaluations are an incredibly effective tool, but like any tool, they have to be used well to perform well. And readiness is proven in the work. It's not an assumption. This is probably one of the biggest fallacies that I've seen in succession planning is kind of the great man theory. And it's the idea that there's someone in your organization that is destined to become the next leader, that is destined to become the next CIO or destined to move into certain leadership positions. And we kind of accept those at times as this unspoken, unchallenged truth. Sometimes we inherit that when we come into a leadership role. Sometimes it's just sort of organically built in the organization. Oh, that person is the most senior in that division and they deserve the next promotion. And we've really moved well past the days of civil service seniority being the single determinant factor in a leadership role. We now, unless you are dogmatically holding on to very, very outdated perception on that, most of us are going performance-based and aptitude-based, meaning that we're looking at a combination of what people have done to prove their abilities, but what they've also shown that could show possibility and performance beyond what they're doing now. So you want to look for that combination of aptitude, but also work ethic and what they've actually applied. So one of the best ways to do this is through stretch assignments and giving people the ability to live into roles beyond what their current role is. And you'll have to talk with your HR department and your organizational leadership about when that's appropriate and how it's appropriate, because you could have views and you have policies that have specific requirements when you have somebody work on an assignment that's out of classification or take on a role that's beyond their classification. But the upside to this is that there's limitless potential here and there's a lot of room for imagination. So I have used assignments like when we were upgrading from on-prem to 365 Microsoft to let somebody run that project who had never really exercised their leadership role and do it in a controlled way with a clear objective, but it allowed them to really start to stretch that muscle on how they communicate with people, how they meet objectives, how they get people to perform, how they get people to understand and adopt the new ways of doing things that we hadn't done in the past. And I think that giving people that opportunity to show that well in advance allows them the opportunity to, number one, figure out what they're strong at and build on that, but also figure out what they're weak at and start to shore that up. Because you don't want to make that all a requirement at the last minute. When you've posted the job is not the right time to figure out what skills you need to build for the job. most leadership positions have some core values that are in there, the ability to communicate, the ability to empathize, the ability to understand and make good decisions. I think there are two things that are kind of unspoken requirements for leadership in the current age. And number one is you have to be easy to work with. And number two, you have to be able to make really good decisions and own those decisions. And I think giving people the opportunity to exercise and show those muscles well in advance makes them much stronger candidates when the opportunities do come up. And the third part of this is the exit. So if you mismanage that handoff, you're going to lose your influence in what comes next. I have known and I have experienced handoffs that were not well managed, where there was no succession plan. And to the point of the first slide where it talked about the disruption and the cost of an unplanned succession plan or unplanned succession, when you have a sudden sea change in leadership and it feels both tectonic and chaotic, where it affects everything and it affects everyone, but no one knows what's happening next. And now you have to understand and figure out what the new leadership paradigm is, what this person wants of the organization, what they bring to the organization. And the reason I say this is when you go through those sea changes, when you go through those periods where nobody understands how this person wound up there. It was maybe it was part of a recruitment, maybe it was an appointment, but if you don't have a succession plan, people don't know the reasoning that goes into these. So having an exit plan, and I want to talk about the value of always having an exit plan. I think that that's one that's really alien for a lot of us, Santa Barbara County. And he said something, and Chris, if I'm misquoting you here, now's the time to tell me when we're done with this. But he said, I fire myself every 5 years. And when he said that, it just, a light went off in my head. I'm like, that's what I've been thinking. That's what I'm talking about. And the idea is that you take these 5 year increments and you imagine that you are going to get fired or that you're going to fire yourself. You're basically saying, how much of my job can I offload to somebody else? And what you're doing is making sure that other people who potentially could take your job understand your job. This goes back to that mindset of exclusion that many of us promoted because we became the subject matter expert on a given thing. We were the go-to person to solve problems. And for many, many leaders in public sector IT, we spent our time where we ran Active Directory, or we were the GIS go-to, or we were the hardware deployment specialist. And we had our little section of the organization and we were the master of that domain, and everybody came to us. And it's incredibly indulgent. It's incredibly rewarding to have people tell you you are the best at something. You're my go-to person. You're my go-to guy or gal when it comes to this. The problem with that is that we tend to then hoard that information and we look at it almost as a threat for someone else to know it. If you've been in public sector IT long enough, you can recall somebody that you've worked with or worked for or who worked for you that kind of adopted that mindset where they were gatekeepers. They were going to keep their information, and I can't share this, and I don't touch my stuff. I'm the only admin in the system. I'm the only one that understands this. That creates a tremendous vulnerability for the organization because obviously, I mean, they're people and you don't know what could disrupt their ability to respond. It could be, they get injured or sick. It could be that they get a job offer somewhere else. It could be they just get tired and decide they're not going to do it. But having these silos of expertise does two things. It creates that vulnerability where now you're dependent on one person and you better hope that person shows up when they need to. But you're also denying all these other people the ability and the opportunity to rise to that same level or even exceed it. That giving them the opportunity to be the go-to person, giving them the opportunity to not just meet the expectations of the person, because part of that is that you become very static in that. If you become the go-to person and you're gatekeeping, you're not particularly interested in learning new things or thinking of how you can modernize that process or modernize how that application is managed. And this is where that build, perform, exit should apply to everything in the organization. Think of it in terms of your enterprise applications. Every enterprise application should have a sunrise, a noon, and a sunset. So you should be looking at what is our exit on our ERP. And even looking at that could tell you, hey, our ERP is working just fine. It looks like it's going to meet our needs for the foreseeable future. You've gone through the exercise and you've determined that the sunset on that ERP is to stay with the same application because it's being well supported. It looks like it's being well developed. But you should be looking at what the next iteration is, and you apply that to everything, your network refreshes. It's really embedding it in the organization that everything should have a succession plan, not just people. So the reason I say that is we tend to adopt a checkbox mentality on these things. Budget cycle comes around, we either are renewing support or maybe we're getting a new application. But part of the problem is that if we don't take a build, perform, exit mindset with all of these things, what tends to drive change is exigency. It's your provider telling you we no longer support the application that you have. It's your hardware provider telling you that your equipment has now reached end of life, end of support. It's your finance director telling you that the ERP no longer meets requirements that are statutorily required of their office. It's all of a sudden you have this outside force that's forcing you to make this move. And think about that in terms of people as well, that it's the CIO that had no plans to retire, but suddenly finds out that maybe they have a family illness that they have to take care of. Maybe they have a personal issue that that drives them to decide they're going to have to retire early. These things happen. This is life. And you don't want to start building your succession plan when a meteor strikes and you figure out that you need to have somebody to take your place right now. So the idea is that you don't want to make these things checkbox items. You want to make it a clear communicated commitment to the organization that we are all going to embrace a mindset of continual improvement. It's kind of the Kaizen model, if you're familiar with that, the Lean Six Sigma. Well, my son refers to it as protopian. So it's the idea that you're constantly building on what you have, but always looking at the future of how you can get better. And I think that the most effective way to do that is to plan that exit. Think of things as, once again, the sunrise, the noon, and the sunset. This too shall end. And what am I going to do with that ending? How am I going to prepare for it? So when we look at succession planning, this is from Harvard Business Review, and it's pretty recent, 2025, found that most leaders rank their succession plan less than 50% effective, 4.8 out of 10 possible points. And here's an interesting stat that CEO departures for 2024, there were 2,221 departures that were reported. I think, and this is the S&P 1500 again, but it's the most on record. It's up 16% year over year. And there's a term called the silver tsunami that's been batted around for more than a decade. And it's the idea that because of generational dynamics, you ended up with people working in roles much longer than they anticipated. So it's the baby boomer generation is now kind of finally starting to exit, but you still have people in their 70s that hold positions, executive leadership positions. And you have my generation, Gen X, that's starting to go neatly into the retirement age category. So, you have people in my generation are between 65 and 45 years old. So you have this interesting group of people that are at the exit line where they're 65 and they're ready to take their pension or take their Social Security and move on to the next adventure. But you also have people in their 40s that are ready to take on these leadership roles. So what are we doing to prepare them? How are we investing in that? And once again, you don't want to let this become an incidental exercise where it's, oh, I'll do that when the time comes. You want it to be where people understand their potential and they understand their path, understanding that there's no single ladder. And this is something that I talk about quite a bit. And it's the idea of a singular ladder. So understand that not everybody wants to be a manager, but they do want to move in the organization. I don't think anybody consciously wants to become stagnant. I think that they look at it as a combination of I'm afraid of what change could bring, and I don't want to encounter risk, but I also don't want to be seen as redundant, and I don't want things moving on without me. And understand that in most public sector organizations, there is a terminus line where in order to promote any further, you must go into leadership. And that's just kind of a feature, not a bug. I think if you look at the private sector, there are some interesting differentials there where you can have people who are clearly high value subject matter experts that have no leadership roles, but they make as much or more than their own leaders because they're viewed as such essential assets. And I think that's something that we probably will need to look at in the very near future, especially as the workforce is changing with the introduction of AI and the introduction of kind of ubiquitous skill sets now. I think that that's something that'll be another webinar, but that's something we're going to need to talk about. But the reason I bring that up is we tend to disregard and ignore people who say, I don't want to be in leadership. We have a quick conversation, maybe it's at an evaluation or maybe it's kind of at a meeting or incidental, but somebody says, oh no, I don't want to promote. And then we're like, okay, fine, I'll just ignore you. Just because they don't want to promote doesn't mean they don't want to progress. So imagining these two ladders and understanding that it's much more about divergent paths than a singular ladder. So if somebody says, I don't want to go into leadership, number one, it's now, not forever. They could change their perspective and their mind on that at some point in time. And number two, it's an opportunity to say, great, then let's dig into how you build, perform, and exit within your current role, understanding that the technology for your role is probably going to change out from underneath you. If you look at all of the disciplines involving public sector IT, network has changed dramatically. Infrastructure is changing. I've had conversations this week about modernizing infrastructure, about moving into cloud or hybrid cloud from on-premise. Right now, the costs of that are driving a lot of our decision making on that. But it's rather than wait for this external factor, for the chip crunch to drive us to say, oh, now we suddenly have to look at going to cloud. That should have been a conversation all along. Build, perform, exit. What's our exit out of this? What's coming up? What do we need to do? For leaders, it's not, once again, taking the assumption that there is a single person out there that's eligible or applicable for a role. It's figuring out, number one, who's interested, and number two, how we build them to be basically a bullpen or a cadre of people that can compete well for a position. Because you want to keep your experts climbing. And once again, they may not want to get into management now. So you've got to look at how somebody can continue to develop their skill set without going into leadership. But once they're going into leadership, what investments should we be making to make sure that they're developing their leadership skills before they adopt a leadership role? Don't make them cut their teeth when they get promoted, because going back to the issue of the go-to person, there are two ways that usually plays out. Either that person gets promoted and suddenly they're going through a grieving process because they're no longer the go-to person. They have to supervise other people. And you once again have this disruptive change pattern where they're having to adapt suddenly and kind of with an unplanned demeanor on it. And that means that you're wasting energy for them having to build that plane while they're flying it. Or what is also common is they just lift and shift their duties into leadership and they don't take on the leadership role. They take on the position, they get promoted. They are now the supervisor of the unit, but they were a working supervisor and they close their office door and you see them working on their thing and they're doing exactly what they did before. They're just doing it at a higher pay scale with a different title. And now you've got a team that is absent leadership, where that team looks at them as an escalation and not as their true leader. So being able to look at the team and say, who here, number one, truly is showing aptitude for leadership. And by aptitude, I mean kind of the humble, hungry, smart, to the Drucker thing, where they have an eagerness to learn the things that they don't know or they haven't mastered, and they have a willingness to kind of be humble about it and to go through the growing pains of becoming an effective leader, not just assuming I am the smartest, therefore I am the best. There are lots and lots of leaders in public sector IT that were smartest person in the room. that it was meritocracy or a seniority, and they got into the role. And if you've been in the game long enough or you've met people and kind of networked, you can identify people out there that you know they got the role because they were simply the smartest person in the room and not the best leader. Because those two things are not always confluent. It helps to be smart, but smart and intelligent don't always go in the same box. Smart is understanding that you don't want to be the smartest person in the room. You're in the wrong room. If you're the smartest person in the room as a leader, especially as an executive leader, you're in the wrong room. You should be probably the most curious person in the room, the person who's asking questions, the person who's kind of prodding people and getting them to see their own potential as opposed to you showing them how great you are and how you have all the answers and all they need to do is listen to you. It's a tough muscle to work out. It is counterintuitive to everything we learn up to that point. Once again, we spend a sizable chunk of our careers becoming the go-to person, an expert in a given thing, and now we have to learn to not be that expert anymore. And that's the reason I say for succession plans to work well, succession plans need to be in place all the time, and all of your efforts need to kind of have that underlying assumption that this is all part of a succession plan. So it's taking the time. It's taking the time out to say, hey, we've got this project here. Is there an opportunity to let somebody take a growth role with this? The temptation is just put the smartest person in charge of it, let them run with it, give them authority, and let's go. But to take somebody who maybe has the aptitude and say, you know what, I'm going to give them an opportunity to fail safely, where we'll have somebody there that can back them up. I'm not going to let you hit the ground, but I'm going to let you slip on the rope every once in a while because they need to feel that there's no substitute for that in leadership. You need to understand by reaction and kind of by how it feels to you when you've made a mistake. You can't communicate that to people. It's not something you get out of books. So this means that development has to be a verb, that development is not just a written plan. It is not getting your evaluations in on time and checking all of the boxes. It's about making it such a cultural artifact and staple that people just unconsciously understand it's always part of it. So 76% of leaders say that organizations must be more intentional about developing successors. That's from an article by Rosenthal and Rosen, Harvard Business Review from last year. And that tells me that 76% of leaders from HBR's ranks, and understand if they're involved in HBR, they're probably pretty progressive leaders. But 76% of them said we're not doing it well enough, that we need to be more intentional about this. And you have this confluence of the silver tsunami where you have a lot of legacy talent and legacy knowledge that's leaving organizations, but you also have new technology that's landing and very interesting and urgent expectations regarding that. We joke about AI taking up all the oxygen in the room, but AI is a very, very new, LLMs, agentic AI are a very new technology for local government, and it hit us like a tidal wave. It did not come in gently. It came in on the consumer side. You had people asking from your elected officials all the way down to your interns, what are we doing with AI and how can I use it and how are we getting value out of it? And so you as a leader in the organization suddenly need to adapt to this. And that's where if your mindset, if the culture is adaptive anyways, it's build, perform, exit. This is just another thing we're shooing into that mindset. It's okay, hey, how do we build our capability for AI? How do we see what performance looks like? And what's our exit strategy? How do we move on to the next thing? Because the pace of development with AI means that there's going to be rapid exit on many of these. Right now, if you're in an executive role, you know there's no clear winner on which of these platforms is going to be around in 2 or 3 years. You're having to kind of make investments based on size and scale of the company, their willingness to continue to support. You can already see where some of the players are starting to falter, and it makes it difficult. So going at it with the idea that this is not permanent, we're not adopting this forever, we're adopting it for now, we're going to have an exit strategy that'll get us ready for the next iteration, makes this much more palatable for your senior leadership, for your electeds, and for your teams and for your organization to embrace and adopt that change. So skills can be taught, context must be handed down. So now we're getting into kind of some of the nuts and bolts of a succession plan. And this is one that I learned the hard way through my experiences, is that your ability to succeed at a role is not articulated in your resume or your evaluation. And getting people ready for it is much more about context of the role than it is about binary information that you're giving them. It is not about reading staff reports. It is not about knowing where files are stored. It is not about understanding everybody's, niche title in the organization, what the org chart looks like. It is all the contextual information that surrounds all of that that creates the culture. It's understanding the unwritten rules and the unspoken truths, both good and bad, that these and the way you hand that down is by being vulnerable and being open and figuring out who your aspiring leaders are and sitting down with them and almost kind of like debriefing. So when in my last role, I was CTO for a large county and I had 3 bureau chiefs. And I made it a practice every week to have some sit down time with them. And I would just go through and kind of debrief on what happened last week and what's happening this week. But I would include kind of my personal anecdotes on it, how that felt for me. Like what's difficult, what's easy, what's happening without my influence or my consent, and what's happening where they're looking for me to give them an informed direction on this. Because it's all of those little decisions that to them were not little. They were looking at me like this is tectonic. Like I can't believe. And I think we've all gone through this where we promote, if you've promoted into an executive role, there's a moment where you go into these meetings that you thought were going to be these grandiose, Palace of Versailles, Masters of the Universe type meetings. And you go in, you look around and go, this is it. Like, this is nobody here following a script. And the truth is that we all put up a bit of a Disney facade when it comes to executive leadership because the organization needs to be confident, but behind the scenes, we're just people. We're making decisions with the best of intention, the best ability that we have, with the best information that we have. And I think to be able to give aspiring leaders a glimpse of that and let them know that you're not going into a well-oiled machine necessarily. Maybe you are. Maybe your organization has this all dialed in. And let them know that then. Let them know you're coming in, because I'll tell you what, if I were promoting into an executive role or coming from the outside into an executive role, I would rather come into a dumpster fire than a well-oiled machine. Because a dumpster fire has many, many ways to be successful. A well-oiled machine has exactly one, and that's keep the machine running. You need to maintain whatever success the person who had that role last, you need to emulate that as much as possible. Whereas if you've got an organization that's going through a rough transition and they've kind of bottomed out, you've got multiple paths to success over here. Anything above that baseline is better, and that's going to be seen as a success. So one of the things, let's talk a little bit more about the exit strategy. So the other piece of this is communicating this to either the assistant city manager or assistant CEO, but ultimately to the city manager or CEO, that if you report directly to them as a department head, and having an early and candid and honest conversation about the build, perform, exit, and letting them know that, hey, here's my succession plan. Here's what I've got going. And because number one, you've got to figure out what their ownership stake is in that. Because you don't want your CEO to tell you who your successor is going to be. I think from just a personal standpoint, it would feel like a bit of a failure if I left and it was good day, sir, and you're shown the door, and then they're going to make all the decisions without your input and without your guidance. I would take that as you don't want my style anymore. That I would take that as kind of like whether it's considered a failure or not. What I brought to the table is no longer valued, and they want something dramatically new. And that happens. And I think you have to just dust yourself off and understand that sometimes that happens for reasons beyond your control. Could be leadership changes, could be elected body has changed, organizations change direction. Ideally, though, I think most of us that have invested in becoming executives at some point do care about our legacy. And the best way to guard your legacy is do it early. and start having those conversations. So when I worked for the city of Rancho Cucamonga, I had a conversation with my city manager well before I planned on exiting. It was years before my kind of retirement age was going to come about. But I told him, look, I've invested 7 years in this position. I have people that are ready and willing and able to take on the role of CIO. I want to talk about what my next journey looks like, and if it's within the organization or outside the organization. And it was kind of a shock and awe conversation. But have and understand, when you have that conversation, you can't unhave it. That once you tell them that, hey, but the beauty of it was, instead of telling him I'm leaving, I'm applying elsewhere, it was, I've completed my job in this. And one of his first reactions was giving me stretch assignments. He said, hey, if you've got capacity, great. I could use you in our transportation plan. I could use you in our next development plan. We've got a ton of things going on. And it just opened up all of these other doors that not only gave me exposure to things beyond IT, but really kind of reinforced his confidence in me, made me feel and understand how much confidence he had in me as a leader beyond IT. And I think that's probably the highest compliment that you can get if you're in an executive role, is to have the senior executives you work for show that level of confidence where I value you beyond your current role. I want you because I trust your judgment, I trust your decision making, I trust your ability to communicate. I want it present for other things. And you think about, like, I just found out that a major county here in California, that they're looking at, I think the CIO will be the interim CEO for the county, which I've never heard of. That is a first for me. And they're saying that this person probably will get the permanent gig. But you are seeing that. I see several assistant city managers out there that were former CIOs. You think about what a unique role we have and a unique position we have in the organization as CIOs, where we have visibility into every business process because they're all technology driven now, and nobody's using pen and paper anymore. If they are, then there's a digital solution waiting for them. Somewhere out there, there's a vendor licking their chops on making that digital solution. But that engagement gives us some astounding visibility. And if you leverage it right, if once again, you take everything through this build, perform, exit mindset, you understand the life cycle of all of these things. You understand the business processes and some of the motivators, historical or current, that are driving business process, that are driving the technology solutions. So one of the statistics that I came across, and once again, it's hard to find these in public sector, but I found a statistic from a business council that said external hires in the S&P 500 nearly doubled from 18% in 2024 to 33% in 2025. That statistic tells me that people are not having those conversations, which means they do not have effective succession plans in place. And I'm not saying that hiring from outside says you don't have a succession plan. Many organizations, especially for executive roles and especially technology executive roles, as I said, technology leaders are in a very unique place now, and I think they have a unique value in the organization. So sometimes you have, elected boards or senior executives that say, I want to see what's available out there. Yes, I have talent in-house, but it's kind of a gladiator mentality of, let's let people apply from outside, and that'll show me, it'll give me a contrast to see how qualified my people are inside. So this is where that investment of continual learning, if you value promoting people from internally, you should be making them the best candidates possible. Understanding that, yes, they may apply outside, and you should look at that as a win, but making them the best possible candidates for internal promotion if they have to compete with the outside. Because hiring from outside, as I said before, has a cost to it. There's a transition cost of learning the new leader, adapting, the new leader having to learn the culture, whereas somebody from inside kind of knows that going into it, and it makes it much easier and much more rapid to start getting to the perform stage as opposed to being stuck in the build stage. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me as I was transitioning roles on this was how many people felt they had the potential for leadership, but were never given that opportunity to stretch it. And when the opportunity came up, they had a mindset of I'm not prepared, therefore I'm not going to try. And so giving people that opportunity progressively means that they will step up when the opportunity comes. You need to be a champion and cheerleader for, hey, apply. If you don't apply, then you need to accept whatever comes next. But if you give it your all, if you go in there, even if you don't get it, you have the satisfaction knowing you gave it everything. And now when you support that new leader or you have to make that transition, at least you know you didn't just surrender your ability to influence the organization and take on that role. So this is, for everyone watching this, start where you sit. This is not meant to be any kind of judgment or condemnation of kind of, where you are in your journey for succession planning. It's meant to kind of give the perspective, and the perspective I have is unique because with the CGCIO program, I work with now up to 100 CIOs or potential CIOs a year, and listening to their stories, and they resonate. They support a lot of the things that I'm saying anecdotally, and it's a small sampling, but it's a significant sampling. And these are people that are clearly invested. So I think that when you look at the broader landscape, I think you're going to find more and more organizations that either don't have the capacity or don't have the kind of the motivation to pursue this. But that's where if you take it on as a cultural aspect and not, hey, we need to stop everything and build a succession plan. It's how do we build succession planning around all the things we do all the time. So annually doesn't work. Things change too fast. What you want to do is have it as an ongoing element of everything that you do. That it should be part of the thinking whenever a challenge comes up, whenever an opportunity comes up, whenever something comes up, when you're looking at your budget, when you're looking at your reporting, your performance evaluation, all of that stuff. It should be looked at through the lens of how is this going to support our efforts for succession planning? How is this going to make us better in the future? Where does this fit in build, perform, and exit? And understand that letting go is the last act of leadership. That there is nothing more impactful on an organization than how an executive exits. And I have seen everything from fireworks and cannons going off to the most graceful and heartwarming and endearing. And ideally, the point of it is not to get the accolades. It's not the cake and punch and have people give you cards and write things on the board. That's all nice. It's more the feeling that I'm not disrupting this by my leaving. And my last role in public sector, my successor was promoted from within the ranks and was one of those people that I mentored for the position. And mentor is a strong word. I think that mentorship is just an ongoing practice of sharing what you have going. That I think that we tend to think of it as very intentional, like sit down beside me and let me tell you how I do this. It's much more of just being very transparent in how you do your decision making and what influences you, what scares you, what excites you, and letting them see that so that by the time they're ready to go for it, they don't feel like they are unprepared. They don't feel like they don't understand the job, so they don't know how to prepare for it. Giving them insight on the layers below the surface allows them to kind of figure out how they want to handle it. They don't want to be you, they want to be them, but what version of them is going to best suit what you're leaving behind? And that's that letting go. It's understand that every single one of us is going to leave that role at some point in time. So, and facing that kind of the memento mori approach of understanding that the end is always out there. You either deal with it now or you deal with it later. But preparing for it now is the best way of ensuring that when you go, you understand and you feel how valuable you were to the organization, and they get to flourish beyond what you've provided. That ultimately the sign of a successful executive is for the organization to go above and beyond what you did when you were there, understanding you did the best you could with what you had, but you're giving them a launch pad to exceed everything that you did. So I know this is a lot, and I know that there's a lot of anecdotal in here, but I appreciate you tuning into this. I think that this is an exciting discussion. I hope to see you all during the Tech Talk on this one, because I think this is probably one of the most relevant conversations we can be having right now in this space. So once again, Thank you for attending the development series here at Public Technology Institute. My name is Darryl Polk, Director of Education, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. To explore all of PTI's learning opportunities and resources, visit us at pti.org. Tune in to next month's webinar, Ready Before the Storm, Technology Leadership in a Disaster. This webinar will be released on Tuesday, September 22nd.